Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar today titled Knowledge to Action and Action to Knowledge, how collaborative processes can address climate change. I'm Ruth O'Connor and I work at the ANU Climate Change Institute, and it's my very great privilege and pleasure to be moderating our event today. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, who are the traditional owners of the land upon which I'm joining you from here in Canberra. I pay respect to the elders of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri nations, both past, present and emerging, and I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. So before I introduce our speakers, I'd just like to provide a very brief background on why the Climate Change Institute has organised a discussion on this topic. So at its heart, we and many people undertaking research across the world are interested in research engagement and impact. In basic terms, beyond writing papers for our peers, what is the value of our research efforts? There's a strong desire among many academics and research funders for knowledge to be applied, particularly in the fields our speakers today represent, in the environmental sciences, governance and the health sciences. But our experience has shown that researchers doing their work in isolation and then presenting it to policymakers or land managers or health practitioners often fail to change policy or practice. That's led to more collaborative models of doing research, models where partners outside of academia co-design research and contribute their own knowledge and experience. Models that recognise both academics and those outside of academia who are actually addressing the issues of climate change can benefit from these research processes. So we're so lucky our panel members today have undertaken these types of what we call transdisciplinary research. And so the aim of this session is to hear about their experiences and for us all to discuss the implications of their insights and experience. So we've got an hour and a half. We'll split the session into roughly 3 equal parts. First, the speakers will briefly describe their project so you get a feel for what they've been doing. Then we'll have a bit of a panel discussion where I probe them a little bit about some of the things they've presented, and then we'll open it up in the last half an hour or so for Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A function that you can see at the bottom of your screen, preferably that rather than the chat. It's easier for us to manage. And you can also like or vote for the questions that people have put in. So please, at any time, put your questions in. So I might get the presenters to share their videos now, so I don't feel so lonely on this screen. And so I'll now introduce our speakers for you. So firstly, in a project about transforming small-scale irrigation in Southern Africa, we've got, and I might get you to give a bit of a wave as I introduce you, Professor Jamie Pittock from here at the ANU Fenner School of Environment and Society, and his colleague, Dr. Enjo Mioni, who's joining us from South Africa very early in the morning. Thanks, Enjo. He's from the Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network. Then we've got 2 project members from the Mai Kuayu National Study of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander wellbeing, evaluating the benefits of an Indigenous Ranger Program. And we're really fortunate because at very short notice, Roxanne and Alison joined this effort after one of their colleagues had to pull out in being posted overseas for a COVID response. So thanks so much to Roxanne Jones, you are in Canberra, I think, aren't you? Yes, who's a PhD student with the National Centre for Epidemiology and Population Health, and her colleague Alison Wright, who is another PhD candidate, and she's joining us from Alice Springs. And finally, our third project, which is about reducing emissions from deforestation in Indonesia. We're fortunate to have Professor Luca Tacconi here in Canberra from the ANU Crawford School, and hi Luca, and his colleague Zarul Mutagin, who's joining us from Jakarta, I believe, in Indonesia. And he's the Deputy Director of Multilateral Cooperation in the Indonesian Ministry of Environment and Forestry. So you can see we've got a really diverse group, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So to kick off the initial presentations, I'd like to call on first Jamie and then Enjo to talk about their experiences in South Africa. Over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Ruth. And Lanice, if you could share our first slide, that would be great. So Enjo and I are part of a project that's been running now for 7 years, funded through the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, on transforming irrigation in Southern Africa. And this is a research for development project, and it has a multitude of partners whose logos you can see here. And they include multilateral organisations such as ICRISAT, national government practitioners such as the Mozambican National Institute for Irrigation, and universities such as Adi University in Tanzania. Lanice, the next slide, please. So the obvious question for Africa is, given that there are high levels of poverty, particularly rural poverty, and there's been great food insecurity, how can poverty reduction, better management of water and increased food security be achieved in a changing climate? And one of the key policies that a great many of the governments have adopted is to increase investment in agriculture, particularly irrigated agriculture. And the argument is that dryland food crops are subject to the whims of droughts and floods, which may be exacerbated by climate change, whereas irrigated agriculture is more reliable because outside of extreme years, a water resource can provide the right amount of water for crops to grow. However, something like a third of the area of irrigation land in Africa is not being actively farmed due to collapse of irrigation infrastructure. There's very expensive infrastructure. And the areas in green on this map are areas where there's great potential to increase food security with more irrigation, but that's not proven commercially viable and is not developing as fast as desired. Next slide, please. So our project has been running, as I mentioned, for 7 years thus far. In the current phase, we are working with over 38 irrigation schemes involving over 15,500 farmers in 3 countries. So we're looking at Tanzania, Mozambique and Zimbabwe. These are schemes whereby poor farmers have been allocated on average around half a hectare of farmland on publicly owned irrigation schemes that are generally run by central government agencies. And we've made 2 very simple interventions. One is to provide farmers with very simple tools to measure whether the water that they've applied to their fields is enough. Next slide, please. And so what we've been able to do there is help farmers stop flooding their land. And what we found was that farmers were putting too much water and the crops were actually drowning, washing the nutrients away. And those farmers at the beginning of the canals were getting all the water and leaving those at the end of the canals without enough water. And that was creating lots of conflict, drying up rivers. And these things were solved with these very simple to use tools. The second intervention we made was a social intervention. It goes by the horrible jargon of agricultural innovation platforms. And simply what it meant was bringing the farmers together, getting them to envisage where they wanted their community to be in the future, looking at where it is now, and mapping out what are the changes, the opportunities and barriers needed to move from where they were to where they want to be. From those, we assisted them to prioritise them, to identify those things that they could directly change by meeting other stakeholders, like agricultural input suppliers, people who sell seeds and fertilisers, or transport operators, and in particular, to meet the people who buy their produce, to actually find out directly from the users of their produce what quality they want, how much they want, when they want it. And in this way, we developed some positive reinforcing loops. And so the use of the soil monitoring tool improved yields, but a higher crop yield doesn't increase farmers' profits unless they have a market, because they could just flood a local market. So by providing information through the Agricultural Innovation Platform, that then informed decision-making by the farmers. They made their farming profitable. That then put a lot of pressure on the governments, locally and nationally, to change their policies. And so we've seen, for example, the Zimbabwe government abandon their policy of ordering farmers to grow unprofitable maize and enable them to grow more profitable crops. And that increased profitability provides a driver for further innovation and reform, driven by the farmers and driven by the people they work with. When we designed this project, we were keen not only to work from the bottom up with farmers, but to work with national agencies and regional organisations. And that's why we partnered with Njo's organisation, the Food and Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network, to help engage the policy side of this climate smart farming. I might now hand over to Njo to talk about how that end of the climate smart farming has worked. Njo.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you for that overview. And it's been an interesting journey, really, to see the transformation happen as the evidence has been generated, generating the evidence together with the farmers, their participation, active role in the project. I am from Fanapan, as Jamie mentioned, and we focus particularly on policy research, policy analysis, and translation of evidence into policy options. The focus really is on solid evidence so that we inform decision-making processes. Our role is across the African continent. Our mandate is to support national governments and other non-state actors in contributing to the policy development processes. And one of the key roles of this intervention has been pushing and ensuring that the governments of the target countries in this particular project in Southern Africa have been, there's evidence of what could work to ensure that the government targets in agriculture are met. We have targets in terms of poverty reduction, zero hunger, aligned to the continental frameworks as well as the SDGs. And what we have done is translating this evidence that we are having here and presenting it to the decision makers and different bodies and institutions across within the countries as well as across the region, so that we have buy-in as well towards adopting these and scaling out these interventions to transform the agriculture sector and realize the outputs that are desired for agriculture transformation. I think I'll end here for now. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks so much, Enjo. So we might move now to our second case study of these processes of knowledge to action and action to knowledge. And so we'll go first to Roxy and her work in Central Australia. Thanks, Roxy.
Thanks, Ruth. I'd just like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I have the privilege of living and working, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. My name's Roxy. I'm a Palawa woman and I have worked with the MyQI study since 2017. Next slide, please. So the MyQI study, just to give you a bit of a background, is a national longitudinal study of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander wellbeing. At present, there is over 10,000 participants. It's the first study of its kind in Australia, and the MyQI in Yampa language means to follow people over time. The study was conceptualized early in 2014, and it's underwent a really quite lengthy development process. So it's designed by and with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and really we are looking to gather data to examine the links between how culture is related to health and wellbeing. We use a range of quantitative measures, and we are particularly interested in the cultural indicators. The MyQI study has implemented partnerships with several communities and community organisations to drive recruitment in communities and to strengthen research findings. The partnerships have improved local community awareness of the study, strengthened the data collection and provided an opportunity to translate the research findings to outcomes or outputs with communities. The MyQI study aims to provide evidence on drivers of health and wellbeing with a particular focus on culture. Baseline recruitment commenced in late 2018 and recruitment is ongoing. Next year, we will commence our second wave of data collection. Next slide, please. So really what underpins the MyQI study is community-based research practices. So when we are talking about research within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, best practice is to use community-based participatory research. And this approach can be resource and time intensive, and it really needs to be adaptable and flexible to communities. It doesn't always take into account, this approach doesn't always take into account the complexities of working in community or within different contexts, whether that be culturally or geographically. And really what we look at on the right-hand side of the screen is ensuring that our relationships with all of these different partners continue, and that enables us to produce really valuable work. Our most productive work is done when we are working with communities where we have long-standing, ongoing and committed relationships. Our partnerships are an opportunity to nurture the study's value and to build community capacity to use the MyQI dataset for the community's needs and priorities. This approach is an opportunity to build up the value of the data and to also support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to engage in the research. There are multiple ways in which to engage with communities. And as I said before, it is crucial to be flexible and adaptable throughout the entire research process. By being flexible, you can overcome trickier situations, for example, where communities prefer personal approaches, where English is not the first language, or where literacy and numeracy skills prevent participation. Next slide, please. So what we were talking about today is a proof of concept study of the larger MicroWise study. So this was back in the development phase of the larger study. And really what we're talking about is Aboriginal rangers. So Aboriginal rangers are able to work on country, often live on country, and they have a really special connection with their work. So the proof of concept study was based in Central Australia. And we have a number of partnerships with Aboriginal organisations in Central Australia. They were able to assist us throughout the lengthy development stage of the study with the proof of concept studies and now ongoing recruitment. By participating with these organisations, they are able to engage in the study in various ways. So one of our communities organisations that we partner with is Tanangia Research Hub, where Alison is based, and Alison will talk next. And they assisted us with this ranger wellbeing study. They helped with the recruitment of 160 non-rangers. And so this partnership with Tanangia Council has been ongoing since early 2017. And over that period, 5 researchers have also been trained in survey collection at the Research Hub. The other organisation that was involved with us for this study was the Central Land Council. So the Central Land Council employs the Aboriginal Rangers, and so we had this partnership with them to enable us to first test out the MicroWise study, but also ensure that we were including some of the Rangers' priorities as well. So today, as I said, we'll be talking about the proof of concept study, and the proof of concept study had 2 aims. The first was to help CLC understand how to improve their ranger program from the ranger's perspective. And the second aim was to evaluate the health and wellbeing benefits that may have been associated with the ranger work. We used an early version of the MK study to do this. And importantly, our relationship with CLC and the rangers has continued over many years. This has allowed us to return to the ranger camps yearly, and our relationship with them continues. A few rangers have also presented with us in the past about their involvement in the MK study, as well as their ranger work. They long believed that there were wellbeing benefits of being in a ranger program, and by participating in the proof of concept study, they were able to demonstrate that with evidence. So that has implications for them in terms of being able to provide evidence in terms of funding their program and that sort of thing going forward. I'll now hand over to Alison, and just next slide, please.
You're muted, Alison, if you could unmute.
Sorry. Thanks, Roxy. I'm now just going to spend a bit of time talking about the results of the proof of concept, which Roxy led, and then go into why partnerships are so important in this space in working in Central Australia. Our framework for reporting results is often around a strength-based, what's working and what's working well, and how can we build on what's working, rather than a deficit discourse, which so often dominates Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. So what we found in terms of our results were that rangers were twice as likely to have a high life satisfaction compared to non-rangers, and they were also 50% more likely to report good health and to have high family well-being. And these results were consistent even after we controlled for things like education, employment status, financial status, health risks, and health conditions. So overall, this means that we concluded from this early proof of concept that rangers' participation is associated with higher well-being. And this higher well-being is not just due to education and the employment benefits associated with being a ranger, but there's other things going on with being a ranger. And rangers will sum this up by saying that they enjoy doing their work because it has such a strong link with their culture. They get to learn from elders about tracking, they learn about flora and fauna, they learn about how to look after sacred sites, they learn when and how to burn country, all things linked with and important to Aboriginal culture. We've subsequently followed up with the rangers again, as Roxy was saying. We've been working with them continuously. And the follow-up analysis is not yet published, but the good news from this paper is that those trends have continued in rangers, the wellbeing benefits. They were observed both in this Central Australian population, but also in the broader ranger population that's now in the MyQI study. So Roxy said at the start that there were 10,000 participants. And of those participants, around approximately 550 are rangers. Another really important part of this recent analysis is that we demonstrated the really important role that culture has in positively mediating the wellbeing outcomes in rangers. So a strength-based reporting has really helped the Central Land Council in seeking ongoing funding and support for the program, and more broadly, that acknowledgement across Australia. So just this year, another $1.2 million was announced for Indigenous Rangers. Next slide, please. So our work out here in Central Australia has really shown how Aboriginal community controlled organisations are key to doing good research in Aboriginal communities. Roxy talked that we worked with the Central Land Council and Tarntine Council in that early proof of concept. Both organisations that aren't health service organisations. So although our project is a health-based project, people understand the wellbeing is much broader than just associated with health. So really important partners. Tarntine Council, in that top photo, Vanessa Davis wearing the MyQI black cap. I work really closely with her, and in that photo, she's mentoring two community members from Ngawala community who helped us do community-based recruitment at Ngawala community. And those relationships are really critical to doing good work in Aboriginal communities. Locally based Aboriginal researchers have knowledge and skills that are really important in terms of engaging with communities, particularly where English is not necessarily a first language, and so they have language skills to be able to help translate and interpret the survey. The second photo there is one where I was working with Walcher, another organisation who, again, is not health-based, but they do work with families, and they're interested in the MyQI data because it has the aspect of family wellbeing integral to the study. And there you can see that they have, brightly coloured troopies. And I can tell you that when we go out in a community in a brightly coloured troopy, people know that we're on community, and they'll come looking for us to ask what we're doing there and why we're there and whether they can help, which is a lot different than if I had just been an ANU researcher going out in a thrifty hire car. So really important in that data collection phase. But I want to stress that they're not just important in the data collection phase. Organisations, their staffs, and the community members that we work with give a greater context to our research findings, and therefore are important in terms of when we're analysing the data, talking to them about the interpretation of it and what it means. So rangers said, oh yeah, we knew that all along, the wellbeing benefits, but how do we make sure we tell other people about those, and particularly policy makers, which is why we've done a series of presentations with them to disseminate those research findings. The other really important thing about Aboriginal community controlled organisations is that they're governed by Aboriginal people, and as a collective they can keep researchers and research accountable to the communities in which we work. Next slide, please. So just lastly, as Roxy touched on earlier, some of our lessons are the ability to be flexible and adaptable and responsive. We've talked mainly about our work in Central Australia, but the MyQI study itself is national, and we have very different approaches in different places and with different organisations in terms of the way we work with them. So one size box certainly doesn't fit. And for us, the ability to listen really deeply initially in the project was important in terms of working out what questions to ask, but it continues to be important. And in the Northern Territory, this deep listening is known in some parts as Dadiri, and it's about keeping research and researchers accountable to the communities that they're working in. As you can see, I think in the other presentation also touched on this, is just how long-term these relationships are. We're both PhD scholars, but we started working with these organisations before we were PhD scholars, and we're continuing to work with them. And even though they're long-term, it doesn't mean we're talking to each other every single day or every week. We've got our own work to get on with, but it's activated at key stages in the research. And I guess just in closing, some of the ongoing conversations that we're having is with communities is how can we access the data, who will help us to analyse the data, and particularly around that capacity building, how can we use it to help evaluate our programs, and importantly, what impact will it have on policy, so those social outcomes that we were looking for in research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roxy and Alison. What a great case study of collaborative research, and you've really highlighted some of those benefits of these types of approaches to research from both sides. So you could obviously recruit probably a whole lot more people than you could have on your own. You could contextualize your results, and the people on the ground have got that empirical data that they can use as evidence of, to get more funding or, progress the Indigenous Ranger Program. And personally, it's just fascinating. I always think of the Indigenous Ranger Programs in terms of environmental benefits, but, the health benefits is really interesting. So thank you both so much for that. And I'm encouraging the audience, please put in some questions as we're going along, and we'll certainly get to them after our final session. So on that note, I'll pass on to our final project, and we'll start with Luca. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ruth. So I will, together with my colleague Sarul, we'll be talking about a couple of projects which essentially really you could consider one, which were about, excuse me, strengthening the capacity to reduce emissions from deforestation in Indonesia And like the first project that Jamie presented was funded by the Australian Centre for Agricultural Research. And if you could go to the next slide, please. The key thing to say first to start with is that essentially was the Indonesian Ministry of Forestry, which now is changed name to Indonesian Ministry of Forestry and Environment, essentially asked ASIA to support a policy-focused research project on RED, which means reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And at the time when the Ministry of Forestry asked for support, RED was really sort of new, if you want, on the international policy arena, so was not very well defined yet. And the ministry essentially wanted to build its capacity to deal with these new and significant policy issues for them, because deforestation is essentially the main source of emissions in Indonesia, in greenhouse gas emissions. And so ASIA obviously agreed and essentially funded the first phase, was a 4-year phase. And because the project went quite well, and we'll sort of mention a few things that we did. And so there was still certainly a lot of need for support in terms of actually working on policy issues and continuing that capacity building program. So they actually went on and funded the second phase, which was extended. So essentially, really, we worked together for about 10 years, and was the Crawford School here at the ANU with a branch of the Ministry of Forestry, which is the Forest Research Development and Innovation Agency of the Ministry of Forestry. We also had other partners, which involved, in Australia was Griffith University, in Indonesia there was the Bogor Agricultural University, and we worked with 3 provincial governments, one in Sumatra, the Riau government, one in Kalimantan, which was Central Kalimantan, and then we worked in Papua as well, because essentially those were the key partners on the ground, if you want, because a lot of the building strengthening capacity happened with those the representatives of those provincial governments that they came to, for instance, to Jakarta for training on various aspects of policy analysis, on what RED was about. And the project worked on a broad range of activities, which went from community-based forest conservation to payments for environmental services to fiscal decentralization, and in the second phase on corporate social responsibility and so on. And in this basically webinar today, our idea was to highlight some of the benefits, the issues that come from doing this collaborative work. Right, but if anyone is interested, obviously, in the actual topics that we worked on and all the outputs, obviously just contact us, and we're very happy to provide you a lot of publications. So if we could go to the next phase slide, thank you. So just to highlight a couple of the challenges. Really, what I want to highlight is that policy research can be very sensitive, obviously, even when is implemented by researchers in their own countries. And so, when you work in a different country, like, for example, me and other colleagues who are working on and in Indonesia, then obviously have to be very sensitive to these issues. So one of the key things that essentially we did was the projects, the 2 phases, they carried out the research. We carried out together that research, and we presented the results in many workshops that often were held in the Ministry of Forestry, so that we could attract the representatives of the line agencies, the line departments that were working on various topics related to deforestation. But really, there was a lot of policy dialogues and follow-ups that were mainly really done by the Indonesian researchers, because my view essentially was the fact that, okay, we help doing the research, but it's really up to the Indonesian researchers, particularly in the research agency of the ministry to actually say this is what the project has found, and to follow up in terms of with their own decision makers. The second aspect is that carrying out the policy research while based in another country obviously is complicated. What I mean based in other countries, that for instance, for example, me based here in Australia doing policy research in Indonesia, it's much more complicated than if I were based in country. So it was really this close collaboration between the Indonesian and Australian partners that really allowed this continuous flow of information of how the policy situation was evolving in Indonesia and how we needed to adjust, for instance, some of the project activities and the focus of the project, in essence, when there were new policy things that evolved. And one key aspect of that is that the project has set up a steering committee, which involved essentially the main research leaders, but also several decision makers from line agencies in Indonesia, which then brought in those new policy issues that were evolving to say what was happening and how we should adjust our activities. And next slide, please. Some of the benefits that I'd like to highlight. First of all, obviously, provided significant resources for field-based and office-based research in Indonesia, for us to travel to Indonesia, for Indonesia partners to go into the field, for us to visit Indonesia, be based at times with them, and obviously for the Indonesian researchers to have dedicated time to focus on these specific policy issues, because as many of you know, when you're working on a government agency, often you've got a lot of competing demands. So that fact of having that allocated resources was very important. It also generated new networks to basically for policy impact of research that before this funding was not available, this type of collaboration was not in place. And we actually produce a lot of good quality publications, which are very important in terms of, if you're talking about strengthening research capacity, we need to demonstrate that obviously we can publish, and we did this together, all the partners, and there are a lot of papers that were jointly published between Australian and Indonesian researchers. And we did that in the end. The last part was in a special issue of a journal, which was the first ever for an Indonesian project. I sort of highlight that because often a lot of the project funded by ESER, obviously the good thing is to produce one book published by ESER at the end, but we wanted to try to increase the impact of ESER research. So we went out and did this special issue, as I said, involved all the team members. And the quality of the strengthening, I think, that the project achieved is the fact that several of the papers were ranked, and they're still ranked actually after more than a year, that were published as the most downloaded papers for the journal. So now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Zarul. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you also for giving me a opportunity to share what we have done in the last couple of years, and now still going on with another project. So I would like to add only a few additional information that already mentioned by Luca. Next, please. There's from the Indonesian perspective, the benefits of the projects is also providing information on how policy and institutional arrangement could be designed for REDD+. So our projects, our two projects already provide information that very useful for the for decision-making process in developing REDD+ in Indonesia. We also provide information how local communities could be involved in REDD+ program. This is also the first, captured in the first project as a PhD thesis that then as the basis for the next phase of the projects to be focused on. And Third benefit is facilitating dialogues among central government, local authorities, communities, NGOs, and other stakeholders. Through these projects, basically, we were able to facilitate the dialogues among the stakeholders. So it is very important to learn from different people, the different perspective on REDD+, and then formulate it into an information. And also the challenges of the projects from the Indonesian perspective is that in that time when the project, the first project was initiated, there is no also the situation in Indonesia, the discussion, the discourse about the REDD+ also in very beginning. So we have to align some of the projects and also have to have a more intensive discussion with authorities in the central and as well as in the local government. So we can absorb what the aspiration of the government, the local people, as well as the other stakeholders about the dynamics of the REDD+ in that time. And since I would like to echo what Lucas said, that these projects address the governance and policy issues. So bridging the evidence from the fields to the decision-making process was challenging because some decision makers may not convenient or satisfied with the situation, that may reject what we already found in the fields. So we have to have something that can convince them that this evidence can be used for decision-making process. And the challenge for the administrative work for the international project also different because we are sometimes it is just like a long-term projects. It's about 10 to 11 years projects. Then the situation also changing, so we have to align with the situation in that time. Next, please. Last, I would like to emphasize the project benefits for building capacity for the Indonesian sites. With this project, we have been able to graduate about 2 PhD students, and now 1 PhD student after the projects finalized, now commencing her study in Australia. We also produce info brief for various stakeholders. This is very important, but to disseminate what we have found in the field. So not only for the journal article, what Lucas said, but we also would like to disseminate as far as possible to the various stakeholders about what we found and we have done so far in the field. We also produce policy brief for decision makers that we usually periodically send this policy brief, and we ask also the DG of the FODIA to brief the minister about what we have found in these projects. The project also enhanced the networks related to REDD work in Indonesia. So we also communicate with other projects in Indonesia related to REDD+ in that time, and also enhancing environmental forestry researcher skills to collaborate with other scientists, as well as what Lucas said, that we also enhance the capacity of local officers at the 3 provinces in terms of the knowledge, skill, and how to develop REDD+ projects at the local level, especially involving the community. So that all I would like to add from what Lucas' presentation. So, and then I finish in this time. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Luca and Zarul. And yeah, again, like pointing out some really the diversity, I guess, of benefits that can come out of these projects. So the title of the webinar is really got a knowledge focus and putting knowledge into action. And I think all of our speakers have mentioned some of those aspects, and I'd encourage you all now to share your screen, the other speakers, your video. And in that final thing, some of the other things that are coming out, so that, you know, the more traditional things like papers and stuff, but also, you know, people getting PhDs, building networks, and a range of other benefits that can come from these types of project, as well as, you know, informing policy and things like that. So we've heard like three quite different projects, but I guess I'm now thinking about some of the commonalities and maybe some of the differences. So one thing that another common theme that seemed to come up to me was this idea of relationships, particularly strongly in Roxanne and Alison's, but it came up in all of them, and the fact that all of your projects have had multiple iterations. They might have started as one thing and they're progressing into others. So before we go to some of the questions that are coming from our audience, and I encourage them to put more in or vote for the ones that are already there. But I'd like you guys to firstly just reflect on, so we think about publications, or we think about funding, or we think about, you know, research informing policy or practice. But I'd like to hear your reflections on, when you're working in this sort of environment, what do you think success is? Like, what does success look like for you? And I'm interested in hearing from a researcher side, but also from the people outside of academia. Did anyone want to put their hand up to have a first stab at that? Okay, Jamie.
So for us, success came in a number of guises. One was setting up a process that was profitable for the farmers, and so it was something that they could continue to do with or without active government support afterwards. Another is that we deliberately, in each of the three countries where we were doing work, partnered with the government agency and local researchers to build local capacity and ownership of the research that was being undertaken. ACR were very good in that they didn't require us to develop a research program that was the usual sort of log frame, and after 4 years we will deliver particular widgets. They were a great donor agency in allowing us to describe a process that could genuinely be driven in part by the knowledge of our in-country partners. And that means that we produce some research outputs we didn't expect, but it also meant that they were genuinely owned by the local people, by the government agencies. We made our local government partners look good within their countries, and that meant that they were listened to, promoted, rolled out in national fora as good practice examples. And this is where I think NJO's work's been very important. NJO's organisation is a multilateral organisation of African national government members. And so for the national governments we're working with, for them to be able to call on the collaborative research that we did as a good practice case study is a chance for each national government to show off to their peers in the African intergovernmental fora. And it creates a sort of race to the top, which has been very productive. I'll leave it there, Ruth.
Thanks for that, Jamie. And Joe, your perspective.
Yes, to pick it up from where Jamie left, So success in our context and the context of the partners beyond research has been looking at how we contribute to the local, national, regional targets, as well as global targets. We have a framework in Africa, which is the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Framework, which informs the work that we do around agriculture. So, and all heads of states, all countries are party to this framework, and it guides the development agenda within the countries. We've got other agendas as well, the Africa Agenda 2063, which also informs what we do and what we are pushing towards as countries. So, okay, including as well the NDCs, the Paris Agreement, the SDGs. So we've got these different targets that we are aiming towards. And the effectiveness of the interventions that are coming up from the project that we were implementing in partnership with JEMI, the university, the research part, is that we are seeing those benefits towards eliminating hunger, towards eliminating poverty within the target beneficiaries. So that then becomes the success that we're looking at. We've got 7 targets under the Kadab Malabo Declaration, and our vision is Vision 2025. This is what we want to see by 2025. And measuring, looking at the successes that we have enjoyed in this project, and then measuring that against the Kadab Malabo Declaration has been very important for us. And then that energizes and excites the development partners, the different stakeholders, the government officials, because now we have a report that is coming up and it's informing. It's the biennial review report on how we are performing towards the 2025 vision. So looking at that, we then measure that success or the contribution from the project against what we are targeting, and then encourage the different stakeholders, especially the government, to say, if we take this route, if we implement this, if we encourage this, then we are able to then achieve the successes that we want. And so success here is making sure that those particular targets on poverty, on resilience, on nutrition, on women empowerment are being taken into account as we are implementing the project.
Thanks for that, Enjo. So yeah, so that seems like a critical point in terms of, you know, there has to be some pretty clear benefits for the partners that aren't in academia. You know, it seems like a pretty basic point, but I think that that's not necessarily always understood by people who are focusing on their research agenda. And I like the points about that sustainability and ownership being driven by in-country partners. Did any of the other speakers want to reflect on how those sort of factors in their own work, or whether there were other things that, you know, what success looks like? And I think in our previous discussions, I know it came up too about the time frames for these things. So, you know, are there differences there that, you know, people need to take into account if they're doing this sort of work? Like success for one party might come in 2 or 3 years, and for someone else it might be 10 years down the track. Any other reflections from the other project people?
Yes, if I could come in, Ruth. Well, it's, you know, as it's just been highlighted for the previous project, obviously looking at the policy impacts is very, very important. And it's also very, very hard, obviously, when policies evolve and there are many factors that make or change policies. So it's difficult in a way to claim, well, the project was successful on that on that event. But, you know, if I can observe some things, are the fact that, well, Indonesia obviously has developed a RED framework, and, you know, it wasn't a project making, but there was a lot of inputs into that by various people, including obviously one of the main ones is Zarul, who's, I can claim those things. I'm sure Zarul wouldn't claim himself the benefits he brought into that, but in effect, you know, I can see how he has contributed, for example, to development of other new projects that are quite large, significant for Indonesia, including in East Kalimantan, a new large World Bank project. And Zarul is one of those 2 PhD students that were basically trained in the first phase. Actually, after he got it, in fact, he has a master from Fenner School, and then he came and did a PhD here in Crawford. And now obviously is one of the people who deals with many different donors in forestry in Indonesia. So the issue of addressing climate change, we know they're very, very long term. So to me, I mean, the very tangible success is having someone like Zarul, who's in charge of dealing with so many donors and hopefully, you know, sending those funds in the right direction. And the other PhD student as well, who's basically executive director of a new Indonesian NGO think tank, and they're working on a range of things, and even, you know, recently collaborating and, you know, with the Ministry of Finance to develop this decentralized fiscal system that the idea is to, again, provide funding to, including reducing emissions from deforestation. So, you know, I guess there are many different forms of success there that are often difficult to measure, but some are intangible that are all very important, I think, in the long term. And if I can say, I noticed that in the chat there was a question about, you know, reflecting on what have been other successes or the reasons of success. I mean, if I can say as well, to me is that success has been developing these partnerships, often is at the personal level, because obviously if you don't get along with other people, it's hard to work together. And that's, you know, the human factor is so fundamental. But also what I would say is that actually the former Asia Forestry Program Manager, who basically was looking after our projects, he also did a PhD at Fenner School, Tony Bartlett, and his focus was essentially analyzing a lot of the factors that were leading to success in the Asia projects. So anyone interested obviously did amazing work, and he's published several papers, could, you know, pick up his PhD thesis from the ANU and have a look at a range of issues, significant issues that he raised in that work.
Yeah, I think that point on the capacity building has come up, I think, in all of the presentations, I think. And so Zarul here is like the living, breathing example of how that's played out, and particularly then into, you know, influential positions as well. Roxy and Alison mentioned a bit about capacity building as well. I don't know, is that something that you see as a marker of success of the, you know, the type of work that you've been doing, or are there other things that you think is what you think, yeah, that's what makes it successful for me?
I think when we're working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, researchers are quite modest, and so I think generally we're constantly saying we're building to success, and maybe capacity building is a small marker of our success, but we would never go out there and go, oh, look what we've done, look what we've created. We actually like the groups that we're working with. So success for us is the groups using the research and doing the advocacy, because they have a platform that is much bigger than ours in terms of influencing Indigenous affairs. So certainly, I guess the Rangers are using our publications and our research, and we're co-presenting with them, and that voice is really powerful when we do it jointly with them. Capacity building has been a part of the work we're doing, but it's ongoing. Like, we're constantly looking to how we can build people's capacity out here in Central Australia. Roxy's was a master's student, now doing a PhD, and there's a number of other Aboriginal scholars in our unit who have moved from master's to PhD. maybe we'll call it success where, Roxy's a professor of ANU.
What a great goal.
Modesty that we have around this stuff. We're constantly looking at how can we do things better, how can we improve, what are better ways of working in this space. And Roxy, you might want to add.
Yeah, I think you've said it perfectly. The only thing I would add is possibly for me on a personal level, success for me looks like communities using what we've produced for their own benefit. That for me is what we're all about, really. And so I guess success in the Ranger program is them being able to use our evidence to lobby for funding and that sort of thing, and really success with the Ranger work was the Rangers coming up to us and giving us our surveys and saying, oh yeah, well, but we already knew all this stuff. Like, we already knew that Ranger work, had such a great wellbeing benefit for us. And so that's success for me, being able to put it on paper so that they can then go and use it for their purposes.
That's a really lovely way of putting it, you guys, and something that we probably don't hear a lot of in the research world. So that's great. What I thought I'd do is, we've got a great question from Wendy in the audience that I'll throw out to you all. So Wendy's saying, these are terrific success stories. Can panelists pinpoint features, strategies, or external factors that you could attribute this success to, and perhaps reflect on projects that might not have been successful? So what are the key ingredients for getting you there? I think we're starting to use some of that stuff, like, Luke was saying, the fact that you actually got on together was certainly a critical ingredient. So it's maybe having some of those critical relationships. But would anyone like to put their hand up to sort of think about, what the ingredients are that to get you to that point? Okay, Jamie, thanks for volunteering.
So a key element of our success, I think, was that donor ACR willingness to allow us to have the research project evolve with the needs of the research participants, the farmers. And the innovation platform methodology we used meant that, I'll start that again. The two interventions we made were very synergistic. So the first one was a top-down intervention where we brought in something that the farmers didn't know about, but we believed they needed. And that provided immediate results for the farmers. They'd stick these tools in the ground and realise that they were putting on twice as much water as they needed to. And by simply putting on half the amount of water, they were saving 1 to 3 days of labour a week. And that's time they could spend doing all sorts of other things for their livelihoods. Looking after family, doing an off-farm job. And so that generated immediate trust and buy-in. And then the social process, the innovation platform process, meant that the farmers genuinely set the agenda in terms of what things the project would work on. It would bring out the problems for them to improve their community. Now, in each of the irrigation schemes, generally there was some burning problem that we had little idea of. So in one place in Tanzania, it was the irrigation offtake infrastructure was too small to let in the amount of water they needed. In one Zimbabwean scheme, it was the government had done a questionable revaluation of the debt the farmers owned, and they couldn't afford to pay for the water. So we wouldn't have known those things unless we had the freedom to work with the farmers and help them fix that burning issue. And then the farmers were able to prioritise things that we subsequently found out were fairly standard problems in each case. And so they were often the input costs like seed and fertilizers were too high, and that their markets were poor, and so they didn't get much money for their produce. Now, because the farmers were fighting each other, they weren't cooperating, and so they weren't doing things like jointly buying seed and getting bulk discounts for buying all their seed together at the beginning of the season. And because the farmers were fighting each other, they weren't actually talking to the end buyers of their produce, and so they didn't know what quality of, tomato they wanted. We'd bring in a tomato buyer from the nearest town or city, and the tomato buyer would say, "You farmers are crazy. What I want are tomatoes this round every month for 5 months. And if you bring me those, I'll pay you 4 times the price. But what you're doing is giving me all these lumpy tomatoes, and you all plant your tomatoes at the same time, and they all ripen at the same time, and you flood the market, and that's why you're getting rubbish prices." So those simple interactions that we could help facilitate freed up these farming communities, because they suddenly had agency. They could suddenly see that they were capable of going and talking to these market people and producing the stuff they wanted and quadrupling the price. And so all of a sudden they went from subsistence farmers below the poverty line to small commercial farmers making a profit, and with some real choices. And that combination of the social and technical is often lacking in many research projects. And because all of the governments where we're working have got big targets for their local officials to improve the local economy, all the local officials up the chain could say, "Wow, I've been fantastic. I've got my community, really firing here." And so everybody looked good all the way up the chain to the Minister for Agriculture, who could go into cabinet and say, "I've got a solution that's working."
And Joe's laughing about this and nodding, so I take it.
I totally agree.
Yeah, it sounds like, Jamie, if I can recap, there were a few things there. So there was about flexibility with your funders, and I've come across this as well, that something's set in stone at the beginning. You start talking to people and it's like, this isn't really fit for purpose. So the fact that you had some flexibility there sounded like it was a thing. You were getting immediate results for your partners. They could see value in it pretty early on, and they were empowered to set the agenda. That sounded like something. And there was an interesting thing there about trust. So anyone else want to reflect on some of the key factors for success in their projects? Luca.
Well, I can certainly totally sort of agree with what Jamie was highlighting about the fact that the donor is very, very supportive in terms of promoting this sort of adaptive approach, because that's our sort of experience as well with us here. And that is fundamental to obviously be able to address issues that we didn't know when we started the project, essentially. Also, though, is that they allowed us for funding to actually improve the original design of the project, because it took us quite a while to come up with the right design. So there was a preparatory phase in which we really had a lot of discussion going back and forth between all the partners. So we really came to an understanding of what we thought was needed, what the other people thought was needed. So it was really a participatory design of the partners, if you want. I wouldn't call it participatory design down to the communities, because obviously there were so many communities, because we were working on a big policy question. So it was only later that then we went to the communities to understand what their perspective was, and we tried to adapt then the research to that, to their needs, essentially. And again, that was really possible because the funder was so flexible. And I think that, again, reason, I think the way I look at as success is because we had these mechanisms of interaction between different agencies and between the implementers of the project that enable us to try to address what the issues for them were, how they arose. And also, I think another aspect there is that we did try to have this, wasn't just about research, but was about a lot of training went on. I mean, I don't remember, maybe Zarul remember how many people came to the training workshops, but we are talking about hundreds of people who attended workshops from the 3 provinces, both from, you know, government officials at provincial, district level, and the local people as well. And that is a way, obviously, of spreading that knowledge and at the same time understanding what their perspectives are. So it was really this blend, and obviously there was a lot of funding that went into those activities that were extremely important, I think.
Zarul, any reflections? And also we've got a question from you on the Q&A about, which is very pertinent, about what were some of the challenges that you faced in linking the research evidence to policy, because that was one of the things that you mentioned in your talk. So yeah, Zarul, putting you on the spot.
Thank you, Lotte. I would like to add a little bit about the success, basically. Yeah, the success is that what Luca said. I would like to second Luca that yes, once we get the support from the stakeholders, either the government, local people, private sector, and so on. And I think this is the success. So this leads to the second question, which is how to link. What the challenge of linking the research to the policy. It's very interesting there, because I was involving in this situation. The big challenge is how can we speak to the policymakers with their own language? So, meaning that transforming the research language, basically complicated, maybe intimidated with so many equations, whatever, into a simpler, understandable, that they can buy in this our idea. This is the challenge, how to make the findings of the research to be in the way the policymakers thinking about something. That's the real challenge. The second one is also related to the language, to the transformation of the information. Even though we already provide, for example, the policy brief, information brief that can be read by the policymakers, especially the minister or the governors or the head of the districts. But also the way we deliver, it's also important. In Indonesia, the way we deliver it also related to the people or the person who delivered it. So the singer is also important, not only the songs. Okay, so then for me, I can speak to high level officers in this ministry. But before that, I need to find out the key person, the key people that I could speak about my research. Then now I can speak to everybody here in this ministry. But also the success also when people like me who are the partner of Australian institution in this research got the confidence to speak to the people. So my experience in doing PhD at the AHU, and then the skills I got during the PhD, as well as along the projects, provide me and made me confidence to speak to the people, especially to the to the decision makers. So that's also the challenge that we need to address. So comparing, for example, I think less successful, maybe less successful project because that projects or those projects didn't or don't find didn't find what is
the right singer,
the right singer, the right people to deliver what they already done in the fields. That what I think about this the question, and also my perspective on the success of the project. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think that's the quote of the webinar, that it's not just the song, it's the singer. And yeah, really interesting reflection about your own capacity building and your own you know, changing your confidence and ability to be that good singer of the knowledge that you guys have produced. Now, I think Enjo, did you want to say, did you sort of have your hand up to contribute?
Yes, so Ruth, I think part of the key ingredients in making projects successful is the systems. I think the essence of it is the systems approach, taking into account other elements and knowing that you don't know everything when you get into space, appreciating that and having that willingness to learn in the process. I think that's very, very key. And the idea of co-designing and co-implementing the evidence, co-designing the research and producing evidence and implementing it together with the stakeholders, the beneficiaries, it becomes very key. And in our experience as FANAPAN, in engaging with policymakers, decision makers, and the different stakeholders from the farm as well as the farmers, in terms of buying into the interventions or the initiatives that are coming along, is that dialogue, that engagement before and during the implementation of the interventions. If research is taken at the end and presented to government officials to implement, it becomes a bit of a challenge. But if they are part of it, as we are developing, coming up with the evidence, what we are doing, co-designing what the project is about, then that buy-in becomes very important, and you realize the success that you need in a project. But sometimes, maybe from the research side, researchers already have the picture of what has to be done, and it's in a way imposed in a community or in a society, and then you get resistance, even if it's a good intervention. Thanks.
And I'm seeing Roxy nodding her head, and I can imagine that notion of, you know, what not to do is to come in thinking, and as you're saying, and Joe, I think, you know, that humility of like, no, we don't know everything, we're coming in to listen and have a conversation rather than saying this is the way the world works. Roxy and Alison, did you want to contribute to this sort of conversation or reflect on what some of the others are saying compared to your own experience about those ingredients for success?
Yeah, I think the point that I would like to add is, I guess sometimes traditionally in research, we sort of think about, you know, what are our outputs? Like, let's get a paper done. Let's get, you know, let's get this project done. And that doesn't necessarily work all the time. And especially when we're talking about working with communities, you know, it can be a long process. And but that's, I guess that's all part of, you know, engaging with community. And, you know, I guess an example of when it can be tricky when you are working with community is, you know, it takes us, 2 days to get out to a specific remote community. And then we arrived there and we found out that it was sorry business. So we just had to turn around and come back. And that sort of thing, I think you just have to be adaptive, and, you know, it's, it's not always easy, but the pros of that is that you get these great, fantastic outcomes that are really valuable for both researchers and for the community as well.
I love the yellow troopy story, Alison, and how it's like instant impact compared to going out in the thrifty renter car where people go, oh. So did you have any reflections on those sort of ingredients about, you know, what's going to make for a successful project based on your own experience in these collaborative situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we've presented, co-presented with the rangers, it's such a powerful platform for both us and for them. So we bring our evidence of here's what's working and here's the success around this program. And then our ranger gets up and really brings the context of what that work looks like, why it's meaningful, why it's really important. Here's the story of my community. And those two ingredients help to have policy impact, I think. There's nothing better than an individual with a really powerful story around why work's important and around why culture is important and why being on country is essential for environmental as well as health and social outcomes. So yeah, I definitely agree with making sure that you have the right singer, and being able to match that with critical evidence is really powerful. For us, one of the things that I think is so successful about the MyQI study is that it's Aboriginal led and it's been developed across Australia with the involvement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And so for many communities that we're working with, they will have engaged with us already across multiple times and across a period of time, even before they received, you know, the baseline, what we call the baseline survey, which is the first survey for our work. And I think it is this ongoing process. And if you're well funded and have enough funding to keep going back and keep returning, it's critical for successful outcomes. So I know for projects that haven't worked well, it's because you haven't built into the budgets, or it's not possible to build into the budgets because it's just a seeding grant, the ability to return and to go back and to keep going back.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to that sort of idea about time frames. So it's, you know, there's certain funding timeframes, but I guess what you're all talking about and what's happened with all of you is that you've built relationships, and that doesn't just, you know, happen in 6 months. And then, you know, some of the real benefits of having spent the 2 or 3 years is you can then build on that, as I think you all have in your particular areas. Now, we're nearly at an end. Did anyone want to have a final say, or are we ready to draw this to a close? Okay, no one with anything burning left to say, but I'd just like to thank you all so much for sharing your time with us and sharing your really rich insights into doing research in this collaborative form. I've certainly learnt a lot from you, and I hope our audience has too. The recording of this will be on the Climate Change Institute website. So if you know people that, you know, might have wanted to come but couldn't, you can direct them there, and they can, you know, still hear your insights. And thank you to the people who put up questions on the chat. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good evening/day for Enjo.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks to the Climate Institute as well.
Thanks, Alison.
Thank you.
Great session.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.